popping the collar today, baby. Alrighty. It is July 2nd, 2025. I am Michael Winkler. And this is The Mike Wink Show. DOJ opens door to stripping citizenship over politics. Throughout the campaign, Republicans teased an idea. The next Trump government would start to remove the citizens of naturalized Americans. Stephen Miller suggested it. The idea appeared in Project 2025. Online fever swamp entrepreneurs like Claremont Institute donor Charles Haywood pushed a national review of everyone naturalized since 1965. Now, the DOJ has taken the first real step towards expanding the government's efforts to strip citizenship from those who applied for it and received it, and has suggested it would be doing so for explicitly political reasons. It came in a June 11th memo dryly titled Civil Division Enforcement Priorities, written by Assistant Attorney General Brett Shumate. The memo directs the government to maximally go after denaturalization cases and ranks which kinds of cases should receive the most attention. At the top of the list are cases against those who pose a potential danger to national security, including those with a nexus to terrorism. Recently, denaturalization cases have dealt with a narrow set of circumstances. Perhaps someone lied on their citizenship application or failed to disclose something significant enough that, had it been disclosed, the government would have declined to grant the person citizenship. The DOJ finds out and files a civil lawsuit in federal court to revoke the person's citizenship. In many cases, this has been applied to war criminals and people who otherwise concealed crimes that they were in the process of committing as they applied for citizenship. But the June DOJ memo's language around terrorism and national security threats is incredibly broad. In the world of the memo, posing a potential danger to national security is enough to merit a review of your citizenship application. It raises concerns that the DOJ will seek to use claims that a person poses such a danger to accuse naturalized Americans of omitting key information on their citizenship applications, which ask about ties to groups that commit terrorism or advocate for the overthrow of the U.S. government. In the Alien Enemies Act removals, the Trump administration twisted the definition of invasion to summarily deport people it cast as invaders to CCOT. Tufts student Rameza Ozturk's pro-Palestine op-ed in a student newspaper was enough for the administration to accuse her of supporting Hamas and revoke her visa. I have not seen the details of this specific deportation, but that seems absolutely bananas. It seems absolutely crazy that they let someone in here for on a student visa, assuming that if they're getting here on a student visa, they're probably a pretty good student and have proven their academic chops prior to receiving this visa. And then you're going to one of the core tenets of the United States is freedom of speech, right? And that freedom of speech doesn't just apply to people who happen to have been born here. It applies to everybody that is here, even people that are here illegally. But every human being that is here, by virtue of being a human being, has the right to freedom of speech. And so to strip her, very literally, of her right to freedom of speech and deport her and revoke her student visa based on the facetious argument that some pro-Palestine op-ed is somehow so anti-American enough and somehow so dangerous that they had to kick her out is ridiculous. Even if she was going as far as supporting Hamas and saying that they're the righteous freedom fighters and blah, 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 and I think Israel should be destroyed and Hamas is the ones that should be doing that and blah, blah, blah. She has the right to do so. That is her freedom of speech. That is the whole point of the freedom of speech, right? That is why we implemented it in the first place, so people couldn't be punished for doing this exact kind of thing. The question is whether the administration will apply this kind of nihilistic legal maneuvering to claim that a naturalized American who failed to disclose support for, say, a pro-Palestine group misled the government through the omission. There's a chorus of people calling for this approach, a right-wing push that was invigorated with Zohran Mamdani's come-from-behind victory in the New York City Democratic mayoral primary. Mamdani was born in Uganda and naturalized in 2018. Representative Andy Ogles asked the DOJ last week to review naturalizing Mamdani over a rap he performed that praised a nonprofit whose leaders were convicted in 2008 on charges related to supporting Hamas. President Trump himself said on Tuesday that a lot of people are saying Mamdani is here illegally. Bro, I am just if they actually... I can't imagine that they'll actually do that, right? I have said this so many times about this administration that there's no way they'll do this. There's no way they'll do this. There's no way they'll do this. But like so many times I keep having to eat my own words, and I keep thinking there's a line in the sand they aren't willing to cross, and then they firmly step right over that line in the sand like it was nothing. I still feel like this is too far out there, right? Especially like maybe if he was still in the campaign, maybe if the election was in 6 months or whatever, and there was all the publicity about him prior to winning the election, maybe they could muster up enough like cynical energy to get this sort of thing, to actually revoke his naturalization or whatever. But like now that he's already elected mayor of New York, there's absolutely no freaking way that they could do that, right? That would be too far beyond the pale, I would imagine. But it shows exactly where the headspace of all these Republicans are, or a lot of these conservatives who are pushing for this sort of thing, right? They're very cynically pushing for this sort of thing because this is pure cynicism, right? Nobody could seriously argue that he is some sort of threat to the country, right? He's a tax-paying American citizen who has a job, and he's been elected to a high place of power. He's the mayor of New York City, the largest city in the entire country, I'm pretty sure. And so, this is just insane. Anybody who would even begin to assert this is not a good faith actor. Anybody who would even begin to suggest that Mamdani's naturalization should be revoked and that he's here illegally and that he should be kicked out or whatever is 100% a bad faith actor. They should not be taken seriously at all. Those who gain citizenship through unlawful means and endanger our national security will not maintain the benefits of being an American citizen, the statement reads. I just can't help but separate this from like the general xenophobic vibes that this administration and a lot of the people that are in this administration like seem to give off and actively push for. I just can't seem to separate that from this. The issue comes down to how one defines endanger our national security. It's vague, used in this case by an administration that spent the last 5 months exploiting the concept for political gain and internal repression. Yeah, this endanger our national security is way, way, way too broad. And if the Supreme Court made some sort of ruling that it is fully up to the federal government or the executive to make that interpretation, and that it's not the court's job to come in and make that sort of interpretation of whether they have properly sufficiently endangered the national security for the government to do whatever it is they're trying to do against the person. If the Supreme Court were to abdicate its responsibility on this and say that the federal government basically has they can do whatever they want because of how broad this is, then what is stopping them from going around and just literally kicking out anybody who has vaguely left-wing views or any views that disagree with them, right? They could literally just be like, they could say, we think Democrats are endangering our national security, and so anybody who's a registered Democrat, we're going to denaturalize them and kick them out of the country, right? What is stopping them from doing that sort of thing? I would imagine that this would go to the Supreme Court, and then I just worry that they're going to abdicate their responsibility and basically say, because of how vague this is, it's not in our job to decide what is endangering or not endangering national security. That's your job. And so this could potentially, I don't think they're going to go so far as to kick out all the Democrats or something. I feel like also that's one of those things that's just too far out there, too far beyond the pale. But the door for that sort of thing is slowly creaking open, guys. Still ramping up denaturalizations on that basis would be difficult. Purely political denaturalizations ended with a 1967 Supreme Court case, Robertson said. More recently, the Supreme Court held that the government could only denaturalize people for information that, had the government known about it, would have resulted in the person's citizenship application being denied. It's far from clear whether rapping about a nonprofit found to have supported Hamas would come anywhere close to that standard. Yeah, this makes it slightly more clear that the Supreme Court has made rulings against political denaturalization persecution. However, it seems like there is still some room for vague interpretation and some screwery. I don't think anybody could seriously argue that him performing in some sort of rap video is at all any serious danger to anything. I don't care what the rap was about. The rap could be about the downfall of the United States, but it wouldn't matter because it's just a fucking rap. Who cares? Patrick Wheel, a visiting professor at Yale Law University who wrote a book on the history of denaturalization in the United States, told TPM last year that though the Trump administration could try and could use the threat of denaturalization to terrorize people, it could be unlikely to succeed in carrying them out on a mass scale. The judiciary up to the Supreme Court has largely upheld the concept of citizenship for naturalized Americans in recent years. Wheel said, cutting corners by, say, dramatically expanding what it means to support Hamas would still be unlikely to achieve much beyond scaring and harassing people. It's a policy of fear that he's trying to do, Wheel said. What I don't get about all of this is I'm pretty sure it is literally like in the Constitution, like word for word, people born here and naturalized citizens. Like, I'm pretty sure the wording of the Constitution makes it so that the idea of denaturalizing somebody is like basically a no-go. What the DOJ is describing would require an intensive review of the applications of naturalized Americans to find those who met one of 10 criteria outlined in the memo as making them priorities for denaturalization. Some of those 10 criteria are more in line with past practice. People who are war criminals, people who convicted of other felonies, but the breadth of the review envisioned in the memo combined with the breadth of who the administration may decide qualifies as a danger to national security places a large swath of citizens under scrutiny. Robertson, the Case Western professor, said that the approach may cleave citizenship between those naturalized and those who were born with it. If you have one group of people who feels very comfortable that their citizenship is secure, they will feel much more comfortable being politically active, she said. That's 100% correct. You are much less willing to toe the line and say something that could be seen as controversial if you know that like you're naturalized and that all it would take is the xenophobic whims of whatever administration happens to be in place at the time to denaturalize you and kick you out for some dumb reason. You're going to be much less willing to speak up and much less willing to participate in the political atmosphere at all. And if you have another group of people who worries that if their political activity goes on the wrong side of somebody in power, that their lives and livelihoods might be vulnerable, that is a lesser citizenship. That is a reason why people might step back from political participation. Absolutely. But yeah, this seems insane to me. I wonder if we're going to maybe see another Supreme Court case regarding this, and I wonder where they're going to stand on this, if they're going to abdicate their responsibility, if they're going to say the DOJ can do whatever the heck they want. This seems absolutely crazy. I would think that anybody who has gone through the process to become a naturalized citizen, even if they've committed crimes, they have crossed that threshold. They have crossed the line, the demilitarized zone. They have crossed that line into becoming an American citizen, and whatever they do after that point is within the context of being an American citizen. So if they commit some heinous crime or whatever, they become a serial killer or something even more horrible than that, should be tried and persecuted and held within the United States because they are an American citizen and they committed these crimes within the country. This is opening the door for something very, very dangerous. This is opening the door for serious political persecutions and literally deporting and kicking people out of the country that you politically disagree with. The Supreme Court it seems like the Supreme Court in the past has said like, hey man, this isn't cool, but also I don't trust this current Supreme Court makeup to be like to be righteous or just at all. And I worry that if this sort of case were to go to the Supreme Court, that they might abdicate their responsibility. They might kick the can back to the executive and say that you guys can interpret danger to national security however you want, and that they're going to start using that cynically to kick out, political dissidents or just use it as a cudgel of xenophobia and just kick out all the brown people or all the non-white people that they don't like. Whatever their motivation and reasoning is, this is clearly the door is opening for denaturalization to be used in a very cynical, bad faith manner. It appears as though some provision in this big beautiful bill will directly and very, very tangibly increase the electricity costs of basically every single state in the entire country. And this chart shows you a breakdown of exactly which states would experience the most. It appears like Wyoming would experience nearly a 30% increase in electricity costs. New Senate GOP bill would kill clean power and spike energy costs. Senate Republicans have crafted a tax and spending bill that would create an unprecedentedly hostile landscape for the development of solar and wind power. If passed in its current form, the Senate version of One Big Beautiful Bill released late Friday would crash the rollout of clean energy, which now accounts for over 90% of new electricity generation capacity being added to the U.S. power grid. It would also stymie the nascent U.S. solar, battery, and electric vehicle manufacturing sectors, which experts say are vital to putting the country on competitive footing with China. The bill would have a profoundly negative impact on the U.S. economy. It would spike energy costs for both households and companies, both of which are already dealing with rising utility bills nationwide. It would make it nearly impossible for utilities to keep up with fast rising energy demand from AI data centers. It would destroy jobs. If enacted, this stands to be the biggest job-killing bill in the history of this country, Sean McGarvey, president of the North America's Building Trades Union, wrote in a Saturday statement. The group estimated that the bill's cuts to energy incentives would eliminate an estimated 1.75 million construction jobs, translating to $148 billion in lost annual wages and benefits. In late May, the House passed its version of the bill, which was widely decried as disastrous for the clean energy industry. The Senate proposed a version earlier in June that was less aggressive in its phase-out of clean energy incentives, sparking hope that some Inflation Reduction Act provisions would be salvaged. But on Friday night, Senate Republicans reversed course and introduced a version of the bill that would be worse for clean energy, consumers, and the energy system as a whole than even the initial House bill. The House bill calls for abruptly ending clean energy tax credits within the next few years, which would leave hundreds of billions of dollars of investment in factories and clean energy products in financial limbo. What I don't get about all of this is I feel like this is sort of cutting off your nose to spite your face, right? Like, if these Republicans want to pretend like they care about bringing jobs back to the U.S. and they care about manufacturing and they care about the average everyday person who's out there just trying to find a job and support his family or whatever, you think that they would be super against this sort of thing that would eliminate like millions of jobs. Literally over 1 million jobs would be eliminated as a result of this. I would think that even if they are full Kool-Aid drinking, they think climate change is a hoax and that it's all a cabal of Jews trying to control you and get you to buy their electric cars and whatnot. Even if you're full in on that, I would think that the negative downsides of like completely just with a snap of the finger eliminating all current and future clean energy programs and the negative basically the negative job loss that would come with that, I would think that those same Kool-Aid drinkers would overlook like, oh yeah, I know we're making an electric car factory, I know we're building more solar farms or whatever, but like I'm going to overlook that because of just how much of a net positive this is economically to so many people. But they don't, that's the thing though, they don't care, they aren't acting in good faith. That's what maybe a good faith crazy person who believes that there's a cabal of Jews trying to control you with electric cars, they are beholden to fossil fuel, to legacy interests. They're beholden to fossil fuel companies. They're beholden to oil interests, to coal companies, to the current people that make money off of the way our current electric grid works and would stand to lose money from greening it or making it more sustainable. It just seems like cutting off your nose to spite your face. It just seems really short-sighted, and I think my problem is that I'm giving this analysis as if these are good faith actors, but they're not. They're bad faith actors. They're working backwards from their cynical perspective of how can we maximize profits for me and my buddies and whatnot. The Senate bill accelerates the elimination of these tax credits for clean energy, electric vehicles, and advanced manufacturing, Jesse Jenkins, head of Princeton's University Zero Lab, wrote in a Saturday Twitter post. Worse still, the Senate draft adds an unprecedented excise tax on solar and wind projects that aren't completed by 2027 based on their proportion of equipment made by companies with links to foreign entities of concern, including China, which produces most of the world's solar and battery technologies and materials. This is an extremely punishing thing that an unprecedented excise tax on solar and wind projects that aren't complete by 2027. These sorts of projects, right, like a large-scale wind farm or solar power project or whatever, these things take years and years and years to actually get finished, right? You have like the planning stage, you have the financing stage, you have the actual like surveying stage, you have the actual building stage, you have the city enforcement code people stage. You have so many different layers to this. These types of projects take years and years and years. 2027 is only 2 years away, right? I would imagine that any solar farm that you tried to get into works right now probably wouldn't even be done by 2027. I would imagine a whole bunch of these projects, there's no realistic way that they would be done by 2027. And also on top of the fact that the vast majority of these like renewable energy like equipment is made in China. That's just like the reality of the situation. And that's not going to change, right? We don't want that low-end manufacturing coming back to the US. We wouldn't be able to afford the products. It would cost us way too much to manufacture it here. So I don't understand. This seems beyond like punishing to do this sort of thing, right? This is beyond punishing. There's no like good faith justification for this sort of thing I can possibly come up with. You could maybe come up with good faith justifications for them cutting back, saying like, we aren't going to issue any new like loans or grants or whatever using this clean energy provision. We aren't going to do anything like that. And we maybe even be reviewing ones that are currently in the works. And if they're really early in the project planning stage and we haven't used all that much money already, maybe we'll consider just canceling them. But the idea that like you're going to punish a project that's already halfway through, or like maybe is 3/4 or 80% or 90% of the way done by the time this 2027 date rolls around, you're going to punish them based on that is like, there's no good faith argument for this I can possibly come up with. The only argument I can think of that would make any sense is if they think climate change is a hoax, they think it's all some cabal of Jews out to control you by getting you to buy their electric cars and use paper straws or whatever. That is the only reasoning I think that could make any sense whatsoever to doing this sort of thing. And obviously that reasoning is completely insane. Think tank Energy Innovation released an analysis on Sunday that forecast the bill, in large part due to this excise tax, would prevent the construction of 300 gigawatts of generation capacity by 2035. That's an enormous amount of foregone energy. The entire U.S. grid had an installed capacity of 1,200 gigawatts in 2023. Energy Innovation estimates the Senate bill would cost the U.S. $960 billion cumulative gross domestic product through 2034. So they were going to increase the size of the U.S. power grid by 25% by 2035, which based on all the reporting I've seen over the last few years, we're desperately in need of that. That the U.S. is projected to be, like the U.S. power grid is projected to not be able to handle the demands upcoming over the next decade or two, and that we very much need to expand. This will have a very tangible effect on energy costs all around the country. Anywhere that would have seen a new energy plant of some kind, whether it be renewable or not, built near them would have seen a reduction in their energy costs and their electricity bill. But as a result of this, because these projects are now going to be squashed, like right in the middle of creating them, this is going to have a tangible effect on this will increase people's electricity costs over the next however many years. This is one of those scenarios where you wish you could have a counterfactual to show people and show to them how bad this sort of thing is, because you almost need like mentally a counterfactual to understand how bad this is, right? You need to have on one hand where the U.S. continues along with this energy grid expansion and clean energy expansion or whatever, and then in 2035 we have that extra 300 gigawatts of energy capacity, and therefore electricity prices are lower as a result. Versus our current reality where we cancel all these clean energy projects, where we don't increase our electricity capacity in the United States, and where we see an end result, a much higher electricity bill for the end consumer than in the counterfactual where we didn't do this silly decision to stop expanding our energy grid and building up clean energy and green energy and whatnot. Less generation capacity also means higher energy costs. Energy innovation, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's 100% of what I'm saying. It is a simple supply and demand equation, right? If we would have had a higher amount of demand, if we would have had a higher amount of supply, it will necessarily mean that the amount of money you have to pay to reach a certain amount of demand is lower. But we will have a lower amount of supply, which means that demand is, you understand, it's a simple supply-demand equation. It's not complicated. Energy Innovation forecast that the bill would drive up wholesale electricity prices 19% by 2030 and 61% by 2035. That means households would spend hundreds of dollars per year more on utility bills by 2035. The hardest hit areas would be Republican-dominated states like Texas and Oklahoma, where fast expanding solar and wind growth would be dramatically curtailed. And of course, the bill would derail any hope of the U.S. reining in its planet-warming carbon emissions. A May analysis from Princeton's Zero Lab found that policies promoted by the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress would increase the U.S.'s annual carbon emissions by an additional 1 billion metric tons by 2035, compared to leaving in place the policies created by the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act passed during the Biden administration. The legislation threats to U.S. energy affordability and reliability, industrial competitiveness, and economic growth are so stark that even President Trump's one-time ally, Elon Musk, has vigorously attacked it. In a Saturday Twitter post, he wrote that the Senate bill will destroy millions of jobs in America and cause immense strategic harm to our country. Utterly insane and destructive. It gives handouts to industries of the past while severely damaging industries of the future. While Elon is a short-sighted idiot a lot of the time, he's 100% right on this. He's 100% on the ball. This is really, really dumb. This is really, really dumb. This is the exact opposite sort of thing we should be doing. Industry experts warn that the excise tax that penalizes companies using materials from China, a spin on restrictions first introduced in the House legislation in May, is administratively unworkable. The rules are so Byzantine that it would be impossible for solar and wind developers to accurately assess what they would owe, potentially leading to the cancellation of projects unwilling to chance a bigger than expected excise tax bill. That's what I'm saying. This excise tax bill that they're talking about that I just read, it seems like way over the line of anything good faith, and is clearly meant to disrupt the market in some really serious way. And I would imagine the only reason I can come up with for wanting to disrupt the market like that is cynical reasons to make a bag so you and all your homies can make as much money as possible for now and in the coming however many years. Analysis firm Rhodium Group previously projected that the House plans for repealing electricity tax credits would reduce new installations of clean capacity on the grid by 57% to 72% over the next decade. The new excise tax on wind and solar would add another 10 to 20% to the costs of those projects. The firm forecast over the weekend, leading to further financing challenges and likely resulting in even more canceled projects. The only thing that this could do is increased electricity prices, Ben King, director at Rhodium Group, told Canary Media on Monday. You're making everything that you want to build more expensive. Already, the legislation is undermining confidence among investors in energy infrastructure writ large, according to a Sunday research note from TD Cowen analysts John Miller and Cooper Pride. They called the Senate bill a full policy attack on renewables, highlighting the singling out of solar and wind for punitive tax reasons. I don't like using the word attack because it can be a bit sensational, but this is an outright attack on our current and future abilities to both expand our electricity grid and modernize it and make it more clean and green. Neil Bradley, chief policy officer of the Republican-friendly U.S. Chamber of Commerce, who wrote in a Saturday X post that taxing energy production is never good policy, whether oil, gas, or in this case, renewables. I'm pretty sure this is happening at the exact same time that we still give tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of direct subsidies to oil and gas companies. I think we provide subsidies to companies who do offshore drilling in, along various places along the U.S. coast. So why on earth would we be giving tax subsidies to these oil companies at the exact same time we are making punitive, very, very harmful tax measures against wind and solar projects, over the next however many years? It's just it is so backwards. But it's not just backwards, right? Backwards would imply that maybe they just don't believe in climate change and they're just old school and they think coal and oil is the way to go. But that is not the case. This is cynical. This is we want to make a bag. We want our friends to make a bag. We want everybody around us and everybody who's in on this to make as much money as possible now and in the coming years, and that is all they care about. The Senate bill also makes things worse for wind and solar by requiring projects to be placed into service or actively providing electricity to the grid by the end of 2027 to receive expiring tax credits. That's a change from the existing commerce construction deadline that simply requires a project to have begun construction to earn the tax credits and could put tens of billions of dollars of projects now underway into financial turmoil. Harry Godfrey, head of federal affairs for trade organization Advanced Energy United, said that the placed in service requirements constitute a retroactive change to the law that strands investments, kills jobs, and undermines American energy abundance. The excise tax, meanwhile, represents a new tax on energy production coming at a time of rising prices. Joni Ernst and Chuck Grassley and Lisa Murkowski introduced an amendment on Monday seeking to remove those two provisions from the Senate bill. My understanding is that they were not successful in removing those provisions from the bill and that they voted for them anyways. And also a side note, I'm pretty sure Lisa Murkowski was literally tricked into signing the bill. She thought that there was some provision in there exempting Alaska from the Medicaid changes or whatever that they're doing. But then they actually didn't do that. And she signed it anyways without reading if they had put that exemption in there. It is hilarious. Backers of the legislation have claimed that clean energy is inexpensive enough to compete with fossil fuels without federal incentives. Ending these federal giveaways will lead to a more market-driven allocation of capital, favoring energy sources that are more economically efficient and better suited to meeting growing demand. Thomas Pyle, president of the Institute for Energy Research, a right-wing think tank, told the Washington Post in a Sunday email. I think it's really, really good that they put a right-wing think tank here to try and undermine what he's saying here, because it's 100% stupid, right? The idea that oil and gas, that coal power plants and more offshore oil drilling and use of fossil fuels is the way to meet our growing energy demand, and that is the future and whatnot, is just hilarious and completely devoid from reality. This dude is clearly working backwards from his conclusion of oil good, oil profits good, hurting oil profits bad. That means therefore renewables, which could hurt oil profits, are bad. That is his line of thinking. However, even fossil fuel proponent Alex Epstein, who has played a pivotal role in Senate energy policy developments, pushed back on the excise tax on wind and solar in a Saturday Twitter post. I strongly recommend fully desubsidizing solar and wind versus placing a kind of new tax on them, he wrote. That's what I don't get, is even this guy who's a supposed fossil fuel proponent is saying that I strongly recommend fully desubsidizing solar and wind versus placing a kind of new tax on them. Because he probably understands that, even though he likes fossil fuels, I don't know whatever his reasoning is, if it's good faith or not, but even though he likes fossil fuels, he understands that renewables and whatnot do play a role in our overall electricity grid, and they do contribute, they add supply and therefore decrease the cost for people, and it is important that they are there in some capacity. He probably is just one of those people that doesn't think it should completely replace oil and gas and coal and whatnot, but that it still has some sort of role, which is the obvious, that is the furthest right opinion that would make any sense to me whatsoever. Any further than that, and you are off in the conspiracy theory land where you think climate change is a hoax, or you are a bad faith actor where you want to just maximize profits for you and your buddies at the expense of everything else. The push to increase reliance on fossil fuels to power the country's grid faces a serious hurdle. U.S. demand for electricity is growing far more quickly than fossil-fueled power plants can be built to serve it. Manufacturers of the turbines used in gas power plants are now backlogged through the early 2030s, with existing orders leaving no headroom to expand production to build new power plants to add to the country's resource mix. King noted that 85% of capacity in the pipeline right now is wind, solar, and batteries, and 86% of the capacity installed over the past 3 years is wind, solar, and batteries. You're taking the thing that can actually get built over the next few years as you're facing this generationally large surge in electricity demand and making it more expensive. The Electricity Reliability Council of Texas, which operates the state's grid, has forecast a need for 65 gigawatts of new generation and storage capacity by 2031. Where will the power come from? Where is this fairy tale place that makes 65 gigawatts of gas turbines for Texas? He told Canary mainstream media on Monday. Their answer is, we'll get it eventually, but we'll have to stop the solar and wind and storage to get the gas. But throttling those clean energy resources in hopes that new gas-fired power plants can replace them would be very painful and expensive and downright impossible if you want AI in this country, Lewin said. You could do it, but you'd have soaring utility costs for consumers and AI competing with consumers for electricity. Something to keep in mind about all of this is like a lot of these large-scale AI data center projects or whatever get like subsidies and tax breaks and special incentives from the cities and locales that they are being built in. So I would imagine that as a result of all of this, that the increase in electricity prices is maybe going to be felt by these data centers and whatnot by some degree, but not to the full extent and not to the extent that they are going to be felt by the average everyday American and consumer, because a lot of these places get special sweetheart deals on their electricity, and that's not going to change. But they're not going to give you a sweetheart deal, Mr. who pays $200 a month on their electricity bill. They're not going to give you a sweetheart deal. They're just going to increase your electricity bill to $300. This is just so ass backwards and stupid, and will result in a very tangible, real increase in the cost of electricity over the next however many years, compared to what electricity costs would be in a few years had we not be doing this silly thing and allow clean energy and green energy production projects to continue to expand and grow and whatnot. Just dum 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 dum. This is so. This is dum 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 dum. The U.S. won't send some weapons pledged to Ukraine following a Pentagon review of military aid. The U.S. is halting some shipments of weapons to Ukraine amid concerns that its own stockpiles have declined too much, officials said Tuesday, a setback for the country as it tries to fend off escalating attacks from Russia. Certain munitions were previously promised to Ukraine under the Biden administration to aid its defenses during the more than 3-year-old war. The Pentagon review determined that stocks were too low on some weapons previously pledged, so pending shipments of some items won't be sent, according to a U.S. official who spoke on condition of anonymity to provide information that the Defense Department did not provide details on what specific weapons were being held back. Oh, that's bro. The Defense Department did not provide details on what specific weapons were being held back. Bro, there's no way. This is 100% cynical. Dude, if they were being serious, they'd be like, they would come up with some numbers and be like, our stockpile of this specific mortar is down to 30%. We want it to be at least at 60% of this number and blah, 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 blah. No. The Defense Department, and also, look, all right, the U.S. is not worried about anybody coming to attack them. There's no serious, you could not make the national security argument for me on this one, all right? The U.S. has no serious concern of anybody coming in to attack them, even if the world knew we were low on some specific missile or some specific mortar or some specific piece of military equipment. The idea that they were going to be like, we were waiting for them to run out of this specific missile, let's go in and attack them. That's insanely stupid. And so, this is 100% cynical. The Defense Department did not provide details on what specific weapons were being held back. Makes me think that this is cynical. That this was their goal from the start. That they really just want to cut Ukraine funding. They want Russia to win. They want to cut Ukraine funding, and that they're going to find whatever sort of just weird justification they can to don't actually do the research or don't actually think about this long enough to support this and just be like, but don't you care about America first? Our stockpiles are going low. Don't you care about our stockpile? Shouldn't we care about our stockpile more than Ukraine? We're not here to fund Ukraine. Blah, 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 blah. The halt of some weapons from the U.S. is a blow to Ukraine as Russia has recently launched some of its biggest aerial attacks of the war in an escalating bombing campaign that has further dashed hopes for a breakthrough in peace efforts championed by Trump. Talks between the sides have ground to a halt. Something that we need to keep in mind is that, large parts of this administration are on Russia's side. I did a story some months ago that an elected representative in the current federal Trump administration in the government had one of their American citizen sons go to Russia to try and fight against Ukraine and died doing so. That should show you, at least to some degree, that this administration is much more on Russia's side than they are on Ukraine's side. To date, the U.S. has provided Ukraine more than $66 billion worth of weapons and military assistance since Russia invaded its neighbor in February 2022. My understanding is that the vast majority, or at least a good chunk of that $66 billion worth of weapons and military assistance was basically our old stuff that we were giving them that we we're going to get rid of anyways. Most of our equipment in the military, so like say we have a specific tank or whatever, that tank has a life cycle. It's only maybe 20 years. And we have contracts with these companies, with these defense contractors that make these tanks saying, hey, every 20 years at this 20-year mark, we're going to renew and blah, 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 and we're going to replace all the tanks and do that sort of thing. A lot of the equipment that we sent to Ukraine was already at the very end or coming pretty close to the end of its life cycle. And we were going to already spend a bunch of money replacing it anyways. And when this stuff, like the life cycle of this stuff ends, we typically don't sell it. We typically just destroy it and get rid of it, and it's just a waste of money. So you can almost see this as a net positive in some way, because a lot of this equipment that we're giving to them and we have given to them was just going to get thrown in the garbage pretty soon within the next few years anyways. So at least it's getting some use, and we're getting some value out of it by supporting one of our allies and also by countering one of our biggest enemies, Russia. Over the course of the war, the U.S. has routinely pressed for allies to provide air defense systems to Ukraine, but many are reluctant to give up the high-tech systems, particularly countries in Eastern Europe that also feel threatened by Russia. My understanding is that Europe has given Ukraine a ton of support, in that, like, I might be way off on this, but I think their cumulative support of all the European countries together is still larger than the support we have given them, like, just from us. They do want to have the anti-missile systems, okay, as they call them, the Patriots, Trump said then. And we're going to see if we can make some available. We need them too. We're supplying them to Israel, and they're very effective, 100% effective. Hard to believe how effective. They do want that more than any other thing. Hegseth said a negotiated peace between Russia and Ukraine, which has been promoted for months by Trump, makes America look strong, even though Moscow is the aggressor in the conflict. He also said the defense budget includes hard choices and reflects the reality that Europe needs to step up more for the defense of its own continent, and President Trump deserves the credit for that. You can't ask for both. You can't have your cake and eat it too, right? You can't be like, those guys need to do more. Those guys need to do more. But also I need more credit. I need more credit. They need to do more, but then they also need to give me more credit. It's so stupid. The defense secretary told lawmakers last month that some U.S. security spending for Ukraine was still in the pipeline without providing details. But he said such assistance, which has been robust for the past 2 years, would be reduced. This administration takes a very different view of that conflict, Hegseth said. We believe that a negotiated peaceful settlement is the best interest for both parties and our nation's interests. Yeah, this is what I've been saying from the start. This administration wants Ukraine to just bend the knee. They want them to surrender. They want them to say, all right, Russia, take the land gains that you've gotten, and that will end this. The change comes after Hegseth skipped a meeting last month of an international group to coordinate military aid to Ukraine that the U.S. created 3 years ago. Hegseth's predecessor, Lloyd Austin, formed the group after Russia attacked Ukraine, and Hegseth's absence was the first time the U.S. Defense Secretary wasn't in attendance. So yeah, I think it seems like it is a good deal for us to continue supporting Russia. We get good value out of equipment we otherwise would have thrown away. We get the good PR and the potential future benefits of supporting an ally in this sort of way. We also get the benefits of countering economically and in other ways the Russian government, who has been somewhat hostile to the U.S. over the however many decades. From almost every angle I can think of, this seems a worthwhile investment and a good thing that we are there helping out the Ukrainians, and that therefore it would be a bad thing for us to, a really weird, dumb decision for us to stop supporting them. But it's clear, and this administration has been signaling well before they took office, that this is what they want. This is what they want, that they're more on Russia's side, that they want Ukraine to basically surrender, and that Trump wants the Nobel Peace Prize. That's what we can take away from all this. The Kremlin, satisfied, says U.S. suspension of arms to Kiev brings end to war. Yeah, my understanding is that the Russian government is very, very happy about the U.S. Suspending arms shipments to Ukraine. And rightfully so. They've probably been waiting 6 months or however long it's been since Trump's been in office. They probably knew this was going to happen from the start. I guarantee you they knew this was going to happen from the start, and they've just been patiently waiting, twiddling their thumbs. When is Daddy going to cut off the ship? When is he going to cut off the arms shipments to Ukraine? When are they going to do it? That's what Putin's been doing. He's been sitting around waiting, twiddling his fingers, just waiting for the moment. Russia has welcomed the announcement by the United States that it will suspend the shipment of some weapons to Ukraine and sees it as a help to end the conflict sooner. Yeah, I'm sure they do. Meanwhile, Kiev seeks to clarify the situation with Washington after the halt in arms deliveries, just as Russia intensifies its airstrikes against Ukraine. This suspension of shipments to Kiev affects missiles and air defense projectiles, according to Politico and other U.S. media. Wait, during the presidency of Democrat Joe Biden, the United States provided over $60,000 million in military aid to Kiev. That is a very... It's a really funny way to write that. Over $60,000 million. That's funny. The decision, a harsh blow to Ukraine, is announced amid one of Russia's biggest offensives in over 3 years of war, aiming to maximize its territorial gains before seriously considering a complete ceasefire. Yeah, it's absolutely not a coincidence that the United States is announcing these arms shipment suspensions at the exact same time that Russia has been increasing its offensives and aiming to maximize its territorial gains before considering a complete ceasefire. That is not a coincidence whatsoever, like 100%. In fact, this makes me go beyond thinking like this is cynical, like, oh, they some elements of this administration are just, slightly more towards Russia's side than not. This makes me go full cynical and think, oh no, they really, Russia has some dirt on Trump, and there's a reason why he's doing this, right? Because this is very like, this is you're almost treating Russia like an ally by doing this sort of thing. Ceasefire negotiations between Kiev and Moscow remain at a standstill. Russia, which already controls about a fifth of Ukraine, continues to gradually advance, gaining ground in recent weeks in the southeastern regions of Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk. If Russia is attacking at full force in ways that they haven't in years, and maybe more than they have at any point at all, it seems like right now is when Ukraine is in most need of these weapon shipments. The interruption of shipments by the U.S. is due to the low level of its own reserves of some types of weapons and ammunition, according to U.S. media. We have no proof of that, though, and I don't trust the administration that they aren't lying. They consistently lie about almost everything. So when they say that it's because we're on low levels of our own reserves, I don't, and they provide no evidence and say, oh yeah, we're not going to provide any details on exactly which weapons we're low on or the percentages to what we're low on, or they're not going to provide any details at all. Makes me think they're lying. According to a statement from the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the deputy minister emphasized to Ginkel that it is critically important that the supply of previously approved military packages continue, especially those that strengthen air defenses. The Ukrainian side emphasized that any delay or interruption in military support to Ukraine's capabilities will only encourage the aggressor to continue war and terror and not seek peace. I 100% agree. Encourage the aggressor to continue war and terror and not seek peace. 100%. If you make this move that shows that like you are tangibly going to weaken one actor in this war, the other would be stupid to not take advantage of that. And so this is 100% like, it's almost like the exact opposite principle of like having a nuke, right? If you have a nuke, nobody's going to mess with you. Nobody wants to mess with you if you have a nuke because they're afraid of getting completely annihilated. The idea that if you gave them more defense capabilities, it would discourage Russia from continuing to fight them because they know that it would continue to be a stalemate, that all they would be doing would be throwing stuff against a wall, and that it wouldn't achieve anything. But now that they know that Ukraine is severely weakened as a result of this, of course they're going to come in and take advantage of that. And of course they're going to be less willing to seek peace. The Kremlin welcomed on Wednesday the news that the United States has halted some arms deliveries to Ukraine, saying that the fewer weapons sent to Kiev, the sooner the conflict will end. The Pentagon has halted some shipments of anti-aircraft missiles and other precision munitions to Ukraine amid concerns that U.S. reserves are too low, two people familiar with the matter told Reuters on Tuesday. Yeah, they can't keep repeating this, though. Why do these articles keep repeating this like that is the case, though? They should be questioning the legitimacy of this because they provided zero evidence or substantiation to this claim that the U.S. stockpiles of anything is running low, or that even if they were running low, it would be a problem. They should be adding a caveat saying here that they have no proof of this and no way to substantiate that claim. A senior Ukrainian lawmaker described Washington's decision as painful for Kiev's efforts to defend against Russian airstrikes, which have intensified in recent weeks. Nobody should be surprised by this whatsoever. It does not seem like a coincidence to me at all that at the exact same time they're doing this is when Russia has been upping their number of the number and scale of the attacks they're committing on Ukraine. It is a good deal for us. It is good value for us to provide support for them in the form of outdated, soon-to-expire military equipment. It is good PR, good future planning for us to support an ally like this. And it's also good economic war by allowing us to counter Russia without directly having to be involved in some sort of weird conflict with them. From almost every angle I can think of, us helping Ukraine in their fight against Russia seems like a good deal, a good decision, and a good thing to do. And not doing so would be untapped potential. That we are leaving, there is potential we are leaving on the table by pulling out and not giving them our full-throated support. Trump mega bill will give $114 billion in tax cuts to the top 1% in 2026. I saw someone quote this. I don't know if this is the case for this specific bill, but that the tax provisions in the Big Beautiful Bill provide the largest tax increase to billionaires in history. The predominant feature of the tax and spending bill working its way through Congress is a massive tax cut for the richest 1%, a total $114 billion benefit to the wealthiest people in the country in 2026 alone. It's not just a shift to the rich, it's a shift among states. Money that could otherwise be paying for rural hospitals, farm support, Medicaid, food assistance, or middle-class tax cuts in North Dakota, West Virginia, Maine, and Vermont, states which get relatively little from tax cuts for the very wealthy, will instead be flowing to billionaires in Texas, Florida, California, and New York. To put that in perspective, if just the $18 billion tax cut going to a tiny sliver of rich families in Texas were instead divided evenly among the population of the entire country, every single person, adult or child, would receive about $50. In all, if the $114 billion in tax cuts for the richest 1% nationwide were instead redirected evenly among the nation's population next year, each of us would receive $335 or over $1,300 for a family of four. So it looks like Texas, Florida, California, and New York unsurprisingly have the most billionaires and people who sit in the top 1% of income earners. And so they're, of course, going to see the biggest overall tax cuts in revenue and whatnot as a result of this. It's just the exact ass backwards thing we do. Ask any serious economist, where we sit on the Laffer curve, right? Let me pull up the Laffer curve for you. I'm going to make this extremely simple. There's a concept called the Laffer curve. The Laffer curve is a very basic concept, and there really isn't all that much that one can take away from it economically. But basically, it's the idea that there is a sweet spot somewhere between 1% and 99% taxation to maximize government revenue, right? And that probably 95% taxation is probably too much and is not going to maximize revenue, but also 5% taxation is not going to maximize revenue. And so that ideal equilibrium spot sits somewhere in the middle between 0 and 100%, right? It's that the vast majority of economists, any serious economist, believes that we are on the left side of the Laffer curve, that we would benefit from seeing a tax increase in certain sections of the economy, and that it would overall increase tax revenues. So this is the exact opposite sort of thing we need to be doing at this point in time when we firmly sit on the left side of the Laffer curve. Most economists, any serious economist believes that the United States experienced the largest economic boom during, post-World War II in the 50s and 60s when we had a really high top marginal tax bracket, which makes sense. It both maximizes the government's revenue and provides the proper incentives in the economy, right? If you already have way, way more money than you could ever, hope to use in one lifetime, and the government is saying, hey, you can't take all of this home in income, then it makes sense that you're going to want, the government says, hey, we're going to tax you 95% on every dollar you make after $10 million a year or whatever, that those same people who were going to maybe make $15 million a year are going to say, hey, maybe I'm going to take that extra, that $5 million on top that would have been taxed at 95%. Maybe I'm going to invest that back into my business in some kind of way. That's typically how these things work. Yeah, this is insane. The exact opposite thing we need to be doing right now. I'll save alligator Alcatraz for Friday, for a few days from now. Alrighty, well, that's all she wrote, folks. It has been Wednesday, July 2nd, 2025. I am Michael Winkler, and this has been The Mike Wink Show. Peace out, y'all.